His boots stopped in the rain when he saw the man lying by the roadside. Blood, uniform, badge. A police officer. For a moment, the world went still. The same kind of man who once dragged him away in cuffs now lay helpless before him. His gang waited behind, confused, but something inside him whispered to stop. In the next few minutes, everything he believed about hate and justice would be tested forever. Before we begin, hit subscribe. It's appreciated. It was a cold night on the edge of town. Marcus, the leader of a small biker gang, was used to chaos. Fights, speeding, and nights that ended in flashing lights. People saw him as trouble, and maybe they were right. But behind that rough voice and heavy tattoos was a man who carried years of anger, not born from crime, but from being treated like one his whole life. He grew up in a poor neighborhood where cops rarely smiled, where every mistake was written in his skin color before his name. By 20, he'd already spent nights in a cell for things he didn't do. So he built his own world, a world of noise, of engines and brothers who understood what it meant to be unseen. That night, his gang rode out after midnight, the sound of their bikes echoing through empty streets. The wind hit his face, and for a moment he felt free. No judgment, no looks, just the road and the roar. He didn't know that a few miles ahead, someone else was about to lose everything he thought he knew about the world, too. When they reached the curve near the old bridge, Marcus saw it. Flashing hazard lights, a broken car door, and something on the road. At first, he thought it was debris, but as his headlight caught it, he froze. It was a man, a police officer, bleeding and barely moving. The gang stopped behind him, unsure. The rain started again, soft and cold. Marcus just stood there, heart pounding. The man's face was pale, his badge half covered in mud. For a second, Marcus wanted to ride past, just keep going, like life had taught him. But something deep inside, something human, wouldn't let him. If you were in his place, what would you have done? Tell us in the comments. Marcus knelt beside the officer, his boots sinking into the wet gravel. The man was young, maybe early 30s, his breathing shallow, his uniform torn from the crash. A faint groan slipped from his lips as Marcus reached out, his hands shaking, not from fear, but confusion. His brothers stood behind him, unsure of what to do. One of them muttered, "Man, let's go. It's a cop." Another added, "You help him, they'll think you did it." And maybe they were right. Every part of Marcus's past told him to walk away. Cops had never seen him as a man worth saving, so why should he? But as the rain kept falling, Marcus saw something else. Not a uniform, not a badge, just a person bleeding on the road. And in that moment, all the noise inside him went quiet. He took off his leather jacket and pressed it against the officer's wound. "Stay with me," he whispered, even though he didn't know why he cared so much. Minutes passed like hours. The others paced around nervously, scanning the dark highway. Marcus could hear sirens in the distance now, faint but growing. "They're coming," one of his men warned. "You'll go down for this, bro. They'll never believe you." But Marcus didn't move. He just kept holding pressure, his hands covered in blood. "Let them come," he said quietly. For the first time in years, he wasn't running. When the police cars finally arrived, the flashing lights painted the road red and blue. Officers jumped out, guns drawn, shouting orders. Marcus raised his hand slowly, his voice calm. "He's hurt bad," he said. "You need to help him." They didn't listen, not at first. One officer shoved him back, yelling for him to get on the ground. Another handcuffed him, ignoring his words. His gang watched helplessly as Marcus lay face down on the cold asphalt, still shouting, "Check his pulse! He's losing blood!" Only when a paramedic shouted, "He's alive!" did they finally look, really look, at what Marcus had done. The officer was lifted onto a stretcher, barely conscious, his hand reaching out weakly toward Marcus. For a second, their eyes met. Something passed between them, quiet and wordless. Fear, maybe gratitude, maybe something deeper neither of them could name. Marcus was still on the ground, soaked and shaking, but in that silence, something inside him shifted. Have you ever carried pain in silence, hoping one day someone would truly see you? Tell us in the comments. Marcus sat in the small gray room of the police station, his hands still marked with dried blood. Hours had passed since the ambulance drove away, yet his heart hadn't stopped racing. The officers who questioned him looked at him like they always had, suspicious, cold, certain they already knew who he was. He told them everything, how he found the officer, how he tried to stop the bleeding, how the others stood back, afraid to help. But the looks didn't change. They still saw the leather jacket, the tattoos, the name that carried a record. One of them even said quietly, "You expect us to believe you saved a cop?" Marcus didn't argue. He just looked down at his hands and thought of the moment when the wounded man's eyes met his. That flicker of life, that silent plea. He knew what he did was right, even if no one believed it. The door opened suddenly, and a man in a hospital gown walked in, supported by a nurse. It was the officer, pale, weak, but alive. The room fell silent. Every cop there stood up. The officer looked around, then pointed straight at Marcus. "This man saved my life," he said, voice trembling. "If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be here." You could hear the shift in the room, the disbelief melting into something else, something heavier. The same men who had dragged Marcus in now looked unsure, even ashamed. One of them lowered his eyes. Another cleared his throat but said nothing. The officer stepped closer, his hand shaking as he extended it. Marcus hesitated, years of mistrust, anger, and memory flashing through his mind. But then, slowly, he reached out and shook the man's hand. In that simple gesture, the walls that had divided them for a lifetime cracked, just a little. But enough. What would you have done if this truth was suddenly staring back at you? Tell us in the comments. The next morning, the news spread fast. Gang leader saves police officer's life. The headline was everywhere. Reporters came, cameras flashed, and people who once crossed the street to avoid Marcus now whispered his name with surprise. But Marcus didn't care about any of that. He wasn't a hero. He was just a man who finally chose to do what felt human. The officer, whose name was Daniel, visited him a week later at the small community center where Marcus sometimes worked on bikes for kids. Daniel still walked with a limp, but his smile was warm. They sat in silence for a while, both unsure how to begin. Daniel finally said, "You didn't owe me anything, but you stopped anyway." Marcus looked down at his grease-stained hands and said quietly, "Maybe I did owe you something. Maybe I owed myself a chance to stop hating." That line stayed with Daniel long after he left, and something in Marcus changed too. He began talking to the local youth, kids who were one wrong turn away from the same road he'd taken. He told them that strength wasn't in anger or revenge or fear. It was in the moment you chose to help someone who wouldn't have helped you. Weeks later, Daniel stood beside Marcus at a small event meant to build trust between the police and the community. They didn't pretend that everything was suddenly perfect, because it wasn't. But standing there together, they proved that even the deepest wounds could start to heal when hearts were willing to listen. Marcus never forgot that night on the road, the rain, the fear, the silence. But he also never forgot how one choice changed 2 lives, maybe more. He learned that kindness doesn't erase the past. It rewrites the future. One small act at a time. What part of this story stayed with you the most? Tell us in the comments. Show some love with a like and subscribe to stay inspired.